Hi everyone, and welcome to the September session of our Acpress seminars. Today we have Julie Fiedler presenting on social license to operate and the way in which it informed a communication framework. So Julie has just completed her master's study that's currently being examined, and she is the executive officer with Horse SA. So Julie will present, and then we have an opportunity for questions. So thanks for attending, and over to you, Julie.
Okay, thank you, and thank you very much for having me on today. And the introduction from Kate. So you can see the title of the talk there, and I guess just in some clarification, when I talk about sport, it's any human horse activity that's in a competition environment. So that can be racing or halter showing, polo, or the regular equestrian sports. So this was the outline for the work and study I've just completed, and actually it's ongoing. I have a quite deep interest in this topic and long-term sustainability of the horse industry in its entirety. This happens focusing on sport. So it's really having a look at how do we define and talk about social licence really in the context of horse sports. So with that. So for those people following horse activities, and particularly racing probably, you understand there's quite a bit of media, especially coming up to the Melbourne Cup and other feature races around the divided public opinion about that sport. There certainly has been discussion around greyhound racing in Australia, and it was stopped in New South Wales and ACT altogether for some time, and New South Wales did resume. So when I'm presenting this, I ask the audience to think about their own sport and their own activity involving animals, and what are the current headlines that you might see in your own networks, and then perhaps what would be the future headlines, how do they read? So we have some emerging issues, or the way society is starting to think about animals is changing. So the public's starting to question more so, what's this human-horse interaction or human-dog interaction if you're looking at greyhound racing? And the motives behind it, the money and cultural relevance. And then, is that animal on the sporting field at risk? So is the welfare at risk when they're under the competition stresses? That's not being managed really well. If it appears not to be managed really well, that's when the public trust becomes eroded. I don't think anyone's saying nothing will ever happen to humans and horses out on the competition field, but it's really how is this managed and how is welfare continually improved. Okay, we've got a photo of a very famous racehorse called Winx, who's now retired, and I think probably the interesting thing happening with this photo is that instead of waving, which would have been the traditional racing photos, just about every human there has a mobile phone held up or a smartphone. So Winx hasn't even got back to her stable or her stall at the track. And there'll be literally thousands of photos and stories and opinions about her performance, or the jockey's performance, that have gone around the world. So that's actually a zoomed in shot of that photo. There are other shots of just about the whole grandstand doing the same thing. So it's real-time reporting by thousands of people about sporting events, which in this case involves a sentient animal. So it also happens that people want to be in the sport as well as looking at the sport. So this is a photo that was actually taken at the Australian International 3-Day event last year here in Adelaide. And once you start searching around the web, there's plenty of photos where people want to be part of the action. So these type of photos become currency amongst friends. Okay, trading shots, who can get the best shot, tell the best story about the event. By the way, we were in it as well. So that's another way of sports with animals, having stories told about their sport, which hasn't come from the peak body itself. So that becomes quite challenging for sports administrators. Past endurance riding to stop on a couple of occasions in the Middle East. So that's when a third party, through the opinion of many others, considers it's time to stop that sport and readjust. So drawing social licence was a little bit difficult. We had a go. So basically we've got old ways and new ways of doing things is often how I start to talk about it. So you've got hierarchical sporting bodies with all the minutes of meetings and the bosses and the corporate messages and things that are happening there. Complementing on the right-hand side of your screen, smartphones as we talked about, flatter structures of decision making, have ad hoc groups set up on social media and closed down again. Both the left and the right side, both speaking for the welfare of the horse, but just in two different ways, probably more than two, actually. So it's not that one is against the other, it's just both have a voice for the horse, but it arrives differently. So you can see we've got the horse there and that photo with the 3-day event, so the artist. So in my study, I had a look at different stakeholder groups that impact sport. There was quite a few, just focused on the ones that you see there on the screen. So it's really the participants' attitudes about horse welfare in the context of those different stakeholder groups. So we didn't ask, should they be wearing bits and bridles, or they think of saddles and rules in sport. What's their relationship to those different stakeholder groups and their attitude towards welfare in those relationships? So we designed a series of questions down the right-hand side there, which is really looking at how, in those relationships, do they listen and acknowledge that relationship? Do that stakeholder group have the same opinion as their own? Who do they think leads welfare in their area? Do they work with? Do they prefer to contribute? And importantly, as we start to look at with number 6, making information publicly available, all sport work, in fact, all businesses and sport with animals, to have a think about what does it mean to be a transparent organisation in a digital age. Okay. So here's some of the results. Basically, we worked with the Australian Endurance Riders Association, first of all, so I'd like to thank them. They were very experienced with horses overall, people that responded, with an average of 18 years there. And the average age of the respondents was 52 years. So we're not talking about people that came into horses yesterday. These people would know about horses, know about looking after horses, and you should value their opinions especially. So there's 3 key results, and probably the one that's of most interest to myself in progressing this work forwards is the last one there down the bottom. So professionals were more likely than amateurs to agree that they contributed to building new knowledge about welfare. Whereas the amateurs were happy for the organisation to lead and researchers to contribute and lead, whereas professionals actually wanted to be a stakeholder. They wanted to have a say in what's been done about welfare development. Also ask some open questions. Just have a look at, we'll ask people to say, what does horse welfare mean? Overall, people often finish the question saying horse welfare means well-being. Horse welfare means care for horses. It's quite a narrow vocabulary. So flip your mind back to that 5 domains with a chart and 100 so words on there that describe different animal states and their mental health results with a positive or negative welfare. A very low level of vocabulary, as in not many words to draw on. And I'm from the horse industry myself. I'm an inside researcher, and we just don't have broad language to describe the different health and welfare states of horses. It's something that we need to work on. So welfare decisions past endurance riding to stop on a couple of occasions in the Middle East. So that's when a third party, through the opinion of many others, considers it's time to stop that sport and readjust. So drawing social licence was a little bit difficult. We had a go. So basically we've got old ways and new ways of doing things is often how I start to talk about it. You've got hierarchical sporting bodies with all the minutes of meetings and the bosses and the corporate messages and things that are happening there. Complementing on the right-hand side of your screen, smartphones, as we talked about, flatter structures of decision making, have ad hoc groups set up on social media and closed down again. Both the left and the right side, both speaking for the welfare of the horse, but just in 2 different ways, probably more than 2 actually. So it's not that one is against the other, it's just both have a voice for the horse, but it arrives differently. So you can see we've got the horse there and that photo with the 3-day event, so the artist. So in my study, I had a look at different stakeholder groups that impact sport. There was quite a few, just focused on the ones that you see there on the screen. So it's really the participants' attitudes about horse welfare in the context of those different stakeholder groups. So we didn't ask, should they be wearing bits and bridles, or they think of saddles and rules in sport. What's their relationship to those different stakeholder groups and their attitude towards welfare in those relationships? So we designed a series of questions down the right-hand side there, which is really looking at how, in those relationships, do they listen and acknowledge that relationship? Do that stakeholder group have the same opinion as their own? Who do they think leads welfare in their area? Do they work with? Do they prefer to contribute? And importantly, as we start to look at with number 6, making information publicly available, all sport work, in fact, all businesses and sport with animals, to have a think about what does it mean to be a transparent organisation in a digital age. Okay. So here's some of the results. Basically, we had we worked with the Australian Endurance Riders Association, first of all, so I'd like to thank them. They were very experienced with horses overall, people that responded, with an average of 18 years there. And the average age of the respondents was 52 years. So we're not talking about people that came in came into horses yesterday. These people would know about horses, know about looking after horses, and you should value their opinions especially. So there's 3 key results, and probably the one that's of most interest to myself in progressing this work forwards is the last one there down the bottom. So professionals were more likely than amateurs to agree that they contributed to building new knowledge about welfare. Whereas the amateurs were happy for the organisation to lead and researchers to contribute and lead, whereas professionals actually wanted to be a stakeholder. They wanted to have a say in what's being done about welfare development. Also ask some open questions. Just have a look at, or ask people to say, what does horse welfare mean? Overall, people often finish the question saying horse welfare means well-being. Horse welfare means care for horses. It's quite a narrow vocabulary. So flip your mind back to that 5 domains with a chart and 100 or so words on there that describe different animal states and their mental health results with a positive or negative welfare. A very low level of vocabulary, as in not many words to draw on. And I'm from the horse industry myself. I'm an inside a researcher, and we just don't have broad language to describe the different health and welfare states of horses. It's something that we need to work on. So welfare decisions by an organisation, when they're put out into the public, create a digital footprint. Now, if you go back to Winks and you think of those thousands of photos going out with comments, that's a digital footprint, but it may be negative. That race ran really not to plan. So we also need to work with organisations and support participants. How do we create a positive digital footprint, in this case in the context of welfare? And a key message that when I'm talking with different horse groups is to say that welfare sits with everybody, grassroots, everybody that has a horse that goes past them, if they're a steward, it's not only owners, everybody engaged with that sport has a responsibility to tell the positive welfare message, not just the overarching organisation. So I've talked about vocabulary, and also for future research, I think it's really good to understand more about this difference between professionals and amateurs. So there'll be some sports like that are golf comes to mind, where you've got professionals defined and amateurs defined. And then there are some places in the world that does happen in Christian sports, racing, yes. But mostly, we've got men and women competing equally. We've got professionals and amateurs, same organisation competing in the same event. And that does can cause a little bit of friction. So I'll just close off here, and I'm happy to do some discussion. Social licence is not an afterthought. Probably the difference to think about with this is banking and mining, where social licence has originated out of. The middle or the central point there would have been banking, it's money. Mining, it could be gold. So that's an insentient object. Because now we're talking about the business of sport. The central point is a sentient animal. So where's corporate social responsibility and social contracts are led by the company or the business to the public and saying, well, this is what we're doing to keep our reputation fine. Social licence, especially with sport and animals, sits with the public. Okay, so sport cannot turn around and walk away. The public is saying, we love these animals, we have an interest in the sport, through the animal, we're going to have something to say about that. So maintaining public trust all day, every day is really important, and how to message out to the public. So there are other industries also having a look at this, and dairy comes to mind. There's a lot of work being done with dairy and dairy farmers, and how to speak about welfare through their social media outlets. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Julie. So I've been involved for a long time with this project, and Julie, I think, really has been at the crest of an emerging wave for the last 2 or 3 years while exploring this. So it's much more prominent in the public domain than it was when Julie started, and obviously in her role with horse sports specifically, it was, I think she's been a bit ahead of her time, and certainly that's been the feedback with regard to some of the conference presentations and international engagement on this topic over the last couple of years. So thank you, Julie. I really appreciate the opportunity you've provided us in presenting to us. So anyone have any questions? Bree, Kim, Leanne or Rob, or comments?
Trying to find the unmute button. Thank you very much, Julie. That was really interesting, and I love your slides. What beautiful photography you've got.
Oh, thank you. They just I stopped.
I'm sorry I sort of looked like I was disappearing into the corner there, because the speaker's down there and I was finding it a little tricky to hear you at times. I'm really interested, of course, having been an academic in this field for quite a while, I think I have a good understanding of social license to operate, but what you've made me think about is the relationship between this CSR and issues management. And at the end there, you started to talk about that you contrasted this with CSR, but could you just go through that again? Are you saying CSR is more from a corporate perspective and social license to operate is more from a public perspective? Is that what you were saying? Is that a bit simplistic?
Yes, probably. I guess I've read a number of papers on social license. I guess some authors still position it with CSR, and just about as a variation of it. There's work being done in the Tasmanian fishery industries that starts to position it in the area of with the public and dialogue with the public. I think there needs to be further work and further discussion around, has it changed becoming sitting within the public because it now involves a sentient being versus money or gold. Public has a different interest. If you injure gold or drop some money on the floor, that's very little issue. Do the same thing with the central point being an animal, that becomes a public issue. So I'd be interested in people's thoughts on that.
I'm sorry, I was really, really struggling to hear that. Kate, I'm hearing you much better. Did you pick up on that?
Yeah, so what Julie was saying is that there are still groups of still bodies of research that position social license to operate and corporate social responsibility together, aligned, but there is increasingly a question about that, particularly when sentient beings such as animals are involved. And Julie talked about some research coming out of Tasmanian fisheries, and there are great questions. I mean, increasingly we are understanding that even fish, things we didn't think were sentient beings are in fact the case. So, Julie's saying that we need more research and more understanding of that, and it really does call to question actually that approach or that understanding we've had previously of that corporate social responsibility, which definitely comes from a corporate or organisational perspective, whereas an alternative view of social license to operate, and this is my note really taking on from what Julie said, is that public dialogue, when sentient beings are involved, the public are starting to advocate for those sentient beings in ways we haven't really seen before. So that is really starting to challenge and question a very traditional and in some ways quite linear view of corporate social responsibility, which has been quite clear cut as to the responsibility we have in terms of the organisational actions we do, and it's becoming quite a lot more complicated. So yeah.
So thanks, Julie, and thanks, Kate, also for the translation. But you know, I think it's a fascinating and complex thing to think about, the relationships between all of those concepts. And I still wonder whether issues management sits at the top of all of that, you know, and I think it is worthwhile in pulling out social license to operate as something more specific perhaps than the broader CSR. So I think it's a fascinating conversation. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Leanne. So Kim, I know you've have you discovered your microphone, or see how you go?
Can you hear me?
Cool.
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear you, Kim. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I worked out that I actually have to plug in my webcam to get the microphone. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, thank you, Julie. I found that really interesting. And I suppose I just wanted to highlight that we have a special issue in Public Relations Review on engagement, social impact and social licence to operate that's coming up. And I've actually pasted the call for papers in there. I know that Bree and I have been doing some work in this space. We had a chapter on linking social licence to operate, engagement and social impact in my recent book of the Handbook of Communication Engagement, which I edited with Maureen Taylor. So I absolutely applaud what you're doing, Julie, because I think this is really important work, particularly in relation to some of the findings and the conclusions that you found here. So I'd just like to do a bit of a plug for the special issue, and if anyone wants to talk to Brie or I, we'd welcome any, you know, summaries if you want to, some guidance on whether or not it's a fit for the journal.
So I'll plug for Julie. I think it would be, so Julie, you and I can talk offline about this. I think it would be the contribution I think that Julie's research makes is that it highlights the relationship between literacy and understanding of a particular issue that might be at the core of that social license. So that was a surprise, I think, about what people actually really understood to be welfare. And I think that once your eyes are opened to that, then when you look around, and we can see it ranging from, you know, RSPCA, greyhound racing, you know, bushfire management and looking after animals, and disaster, because I'm working in a disaster sort of area at the moment, one of my areas, and, you know, the idea of people needing to evacuate with animals, and what's the responsibility of government to incorporate this. So it's an extremely broad-ranging issue, but it's about people's understanding of that notion of where that animal fits within this organisational responsibility. It's fascinating.
Hi, Julie. It's Rob.
Hey, Rob.
I'm just interested to know, because I missed the start of the presentation. So you based it on, obviously, horses and the equine industry. When you put your survey out, was it targeted at certain areas of the horse industry?
Okay. Yes, I worked with the Australian Endurance Riders Association, so they distribute it to their members.
And to give you context on that, Rob, so the Australian Endurance, it's a little bit like horse racing in that it is an extremely, it's not as high profile, but it is a very international industry for Australia. It's also a very valuable industry, but it also, just like horse racing, has that amateur versus professional scope within its remit. You know, there are these amateurs and then there are all these people who breed, although the research unpacks some of the complexities associated with that scope. So what we're seeing, I think, is that we are seeing the impact of social license particularly in the US, where, you know, greyhound racing is closing down. There's increasing challenges to horse racing as an industry. So those industries are contracting significantly. And in the US, you can see it's almost moving to the West. So, you know, every kind of second month, there is another greyhound track that gets closed down, or horse racing track that gets closed down, or an amendment to the way that industry is happening. Now, that hasn't happened in Australia, but if I think there are lessons here that even though this study was specific to a particular horse sport, the context or the concepts require further research in terms of their applicability to, you know, the racing industry or other industries more broadly. So noting that this was master's study, so it was really an expansion to existing knowledge or taking concepts to move it to PhD level, it would be really looking at the theory and expanding the case study. And that is absolutely, I think, worthwhile and probably necessary given where, you know, some of the public arguments about horse racing sit. And I think an ignorance by many of, and I'll be very upfront here because I've been involved in horse racing personally since I was in my early 20s. I breed horses. I no longer race. I'm one of the people that has moved away from the sport because I've lost. I'm challenged by the sport and what it presents for me, but I'm the average. I'm the person who has my 2 brood mares bred for racing, and the sport has now become too difficult for me to financially engage with, but also the social advocacy there. I'm just not prepared to go and advocate for my horses anymore, given I've kind of lost a bit of faith. Now, if that happens and if there's a multiplier effect there, and that's just not just me, but lots of people, then eventually the sport closes down and becomes very much that one person or that one stable or that one trainer sport. And I think we are seeing that, and it's very high risk to the industry if that trajectory continues and this social license to operate is not engaged with the very senior members of industry. And my personal view is it's not. They just dismiss it because it's all about betting and fashion, and you know, it's like, oh, it'll just pass. And Julie's uncovered some of those themes that probably impact more broadly. That would be that's my opinion. So sorry, Julie, I'm talking on your behalf. But I'm passionate
well, you've got better sound.
Yeah. I was just interested. I was asking because the findings and the conclusion seem to have broad statements in it, but I would imagine that there are areas in the horse industry which, as illustrated by yourself, that there are people that have quite high emotions in that industry. And when you look at different sections of the industry, like jumps against, you know, flat racing, against equestrian events, and as then you were saying, which I wasn't aware of, is the longer distance event, that you know, people would hold some very strong views, and I was just wondering whether the horse industry is just held up as an example for broader statements on sport and animals, or was it more about funneling in or channeling in down into the sports, the horse sports industries?
I guess, first of all, since the last few weeks there's a media release that's come out. So the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities will be meeting. I'll send that link, but they've got a whole day on basically public perception of racing. I guess it is very broad, as you said, and I present this to horse owner audiences, and this whole concept of the fact that the public might have an opinion on what they do with their horses, let alone anything else, shocks them at that point. So,
Yeah.
So it's really it is really aimed at the horse, the broader horse industries.
Can I add a comment there, just a reflection from what I'm seeing in the literature as well, is the idea that you've got social license at the project level, at the organisational level, at the industry level. So that kind of ties in of saying, and I'm completely ignorant with horse racing and horse sports, so apologies if I get the terminology wrong, but that comment to me seems to imply that, you know, there are different types of sport within horse sports, for want of a better word, that they may have different social licenses as opposed to a certain organisation, as opposed to the industry overall. And then we also have communities of interest around animal welfare that are also impacting on the overall industry. So there's actually multiple layers at play here.
Yes.
So that might be, you know, potentially really interesting to explore going forward.
So yes, absolutely. So Brie, I would think that that's one of the complexities of this whole discussion, is that there's probably that one of the common issues are the impact of the public sphere, the dialogic public sphere, where people are able to speak and advocate and organise themselves against a particular action, which we see generally against an organisation that's doing the wrong thing. But it is that notion, the particular complexity with animal sports, and there's a parallel here with greyhound racing as an example, is the advocacy on behalf of another being, you know, and that is complicated further by the industrial setting in which many of these sports take place. So where there is, you know, dachshund racing or flyball or something which is seen as fun, where we, you know, get our little Shetlands and we just race them down the middle of a track. If there isn't a grounding there in an industrial betting, then it's not quite so complex. It's clearly fun. It's that advocacy on behalf of the animal that can't speak for itself within these animal sports that becomes probably the contested ground. So one of the things that I think really needs further unpacking is that multiple layer of the influence and what does constitute the influence on a social license to operate in an animal-based environment or animal-based sport, as opposed to a normal social license to operate in mining or, you know, something else. But again, you know, in mining, you're talking about wildlife and you're talking about the environment and you're talking about these things that are advocated for by the public. So it is that multiple layer that makes it very complex research to do. So one of the things when Julie was doing this was that in the first instance, looking at the domains, the how people understand welfare, because that was the core issue with regard to this particular topic, is what do we understand about welfare when we're talking about this particular sport. And I don't know that that was a surprise that there was that literacy issue or that the lack of understanding, even at that very first early stage of, well, if we don't understand what it means to look after something, and we can see that almost in the climate change environment, if we don't understand what it is to look after something, and we're all have different understandings of what that looks like, then how can we take action and create a plan and communicate about that as a broader concept? So this is coming right back down to that initial understanding, and I think the lesson there is from an organisational perspective is even gathering what those understandings are about that particular thing, which in this case is welfare, but if it's another organisation it might be something else, before we you know, proceed. And we in PR know that sometimes our evaluation isn't necessarily as good as it should be from the very first step in understanding what the issue is before we then develop plans to, you know, try and address some of those issues.
Yeah, it's quite say common, but it's often misunderstood that a high health status in a horse that is super healthy, like this horse in the photo, or racing, is a horse with good welfare. And just part of talking with different horse groups is to really expand thinking on that as well. If that horse does not have his social needs met, it's got behavioural issues occurring, which is reflection of something to do with his management. That's welfare impact. So in other work we've done, there's made some new drawings and run workshops and various things like this. So it's quite an active investigation that's really ongoing, and working with horse people and saying, well, we've just got to really understand what is welfare before we can say, well, how are we going to talk about it. So I agree with that, Kate.
Okay, great. So any further questions? I think Bree and Kim, it would be really good for Julie to possibly touch base with regard to, you know, a paper to support your journal.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Great. Well, thanks for everyone for attending. I'm beaming in from the Twin Waters Resort in Coolum. I've sent the kids off to the pool. So I know that Katarina was trying to beam in. She's on some holiday. So there's a lot of us on holiday. So I will piece together this recording, sent the link out. Julie, once again, I really appreciate you, you know, putting together a presentation. It's a really, really important issue. I think it's emerging. It's not going to go away anytime soon. So at the moment, Julie is looking to further her study in terms of a doctoral study, and what that might look like is still an emerging beast, but certainly I think it's very worth continuing to explore, and Julie will be more than happy to continue any conversations with anyone who's interested in that kind of area. So hey, thanks, Julie. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Julie.
All right.
Thank you,
Very
Julie.
much.
Thanks, everyone, and see you at the next Acpress, which is going to be in October, and we'll send out the details in the next few weeks.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Julie.